Molly Roškar works with a constellation of objects, materials, and processes, from restoring heirloom cabinets to making natural dyes to whittling spoons, knives, and creatures, all within a core theme of tradition, sustainability, and great curiosity and care. Because I can get obsessed with details, we got into a bit of a conversation about shellac, which I now know is bug-processed resin. It's been used for thousands of years as a natural primer, stain, and varnish, and it offers a deep lens into the structure of the wood. We also talked about art and craft. As Molly explains, it would diminish art if you ruled out craft, and it would diminish craft if you ruled out conceptual processes. She talks about her own work with tangible objects as a response to theoretical questions she wants to explore. Intention as key to her process, and the beauty that comes from that which is simple and practical but not obvious. Here's my conversation with Molly. You were one of those serendipitous, I saw a post by Stefan and then I saw the work that you did and I thought, oh, it would be so cool if she was willing to talk to me. So that's great.
And it turns out I like to talk.
You're my kind of guest then.
we can do this.
Why don't we start by having you talk a bit about the work that you do?
It's funny because I was speaking with a friend today, and speaking of how difficult it is sometimes to identify what exactly it is that I do, because it's such a constellation of activities as well as processes. I restore objects, I teach workshops, and I make things. And I think that happened out of necessity because my husband and I moved from the United States, and he's Slovene and I'm American. And we moved to Zurich because Zurich is between Slovenia and the United States. He had a postdoc position, and I had been working as a singer-songwriter in Seattle, and then also had then naturally like 3 other jobs that I did for an income. And one of those jobs was working with shellac. And then I was able to find work doing that here. But after children, they prefer that you work 100%. I didn't want to work 100%. So that means there's this space after children also where, because of the dynamics of the way things function in Switzerland, it is more reasonable for a family to have one income, who's the higher income, and the other person stays home rather than paying for childcare. As well as I like to be with them, but that became a real factor. And then what happens when you return and there's not really a space that's held for you? And so I think that then it became like, okay, well, I can restore objects and I can also teach processes that I'm using because I think that these processes are interesting, and maybe other people think that these processes are interesting.
So when you say constellation of activities, and I was looking at your website and of the range of things you even said you do, so you restore objects, that's already a big category of things, and then workshops in whittling and cool stuff like that. It felt like the unifying, not that there has to be a unifying theme at all, but it felt like something that was common was sustainable approaches, natural processes, and that applied to everything that you did.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
How did that come about?
The seed of it was in Seattle because I worked for a woman there who was doing like interior architectural surfaces. that translates into these really big old houses where somebody would renovate one part of the house maybe, but they wanted to connect the wooden surfaces with one another so that they look identical or close to one another. And they also kind of wanted to have an understanding of how the two might work together. And she worked just with shellac. Are you familiar with that material?
I feel like it's not paint. It's
It's
something shiny.
it is shiny.
Right? Okay.
So it's really cool material. It's bug processed resin. So that means that there's these bugs and they live on trees and they eat the sap, the resin from the tree. And as they're eating that resin and spitting it out or pooping it out, or they're digesting it, and they're covering their body with this stuff, right?
Wow.
And then it creates a shell over their body so that they're protected because they're kind of like aphids. So there's thousands, millions of them, right? And they just replicate all up and down the tree. And they're eating this resin and making this shell that covers their body. People then harvest them because the bugs are used for a dye. And then the shell that they've like covered their bodies with, which is the resin that they've been chewing on from the tree, that is cleaned from like wood matter and bug matter and like heated up and stretched out in these really thin, flaky crystals almost. And then it's solvent in pure food grain alcohol. When you apply it to the surface of anything, ideally wood, then the alcohol evaporates and this layer of tree sap that's been chewed by bugs then remains on the surface.
That's amazing.
Isn't it?
I thought it just came in a can.
Yeah, you can get it in a can too. The cool thing about it is that it functions as a lens. So if you use a polyurethane lacquer on wood, then it has plastics in it, and those plastics ultimately start to deteriorate with light and oxygen, and they will yellow or turn like shift green, and it reflects light. So that means your eye is getting light bounced back at it. You're not having as immediate deep visibility into the grain and structure of the wood. Whereas shellac doesn't have anything that's interfering with that. Also, it's very deep into that wood structure. So you get this lens into the structure.
I'm having one of those moments and I realize that something is just way more complex and interesting than I could ever have possibly imagined. That was great.
So fun. It's so fun. And I mean, the other thing is like it's biodegradable and it's absolutely repairable. Yes, if you set down like alcohol or something really hot on it, you're going to damage some of that, but you don't have to then repair the entire surface of the table. You repair an area of it because it reamalgamates with another solution of shellac.
So I'm trying to picture if somebody came to you with a project and they
Yeah.
said, here's a desk or here's an
Yeah.
old set of dresser drawers.
Mm-hmm.
And then you would restore the surface, but also if there's little bits that are creaky or there's a missing knob or something is warped, or you fix all of that and you give back a beautiful restored chest of drawers.
It's beautiful.
Oh, wow.
Fantastic. No. So like typically I have a pretty small workspace, so I don't take in giant wardrobes because of the type of work that you have to do with like an old, for instance, like a Biedermeier wardrobe is like a classic sort of German, Austrian, Switzerland. You find these huge wardrobes made out of walnut, just gorgeous joinery and everything, but they're massive clamps that you have to have when you're fixing them is just it's a lot. So I tend to take objects that don't have a lot of structural repair that's necessary. I don't have a lot of machinery. I work only with hand tools. So that means if somebody has a chair leg that's broken, then I send them to a carpenter who fixes the chair leg. If it's a design object like the Corbusier, Jean-Paul Jeanneret objects that are on my website, those are from architects that are really historically significant. And so the objects that they designed and had craftspeople in India make, because this is part of the building of Chandigarh, right? I can work with the shellac that was original and preserve that, and then touch up areas that match the original on the object.
Where do you fall on the craft person versus artist or craft versus art conversation?
I don't even know actually where I fall into that. Like, craft is art, art is craft. I don't think there's really a distinction that can be made. You can like yell about where somebody fits historically or how you want to put them into context of which people are the most famous. But I think that it would diminish art if you ruled out craft. And it would diminish craft if you rule out conceptual processes that are almost purely conceptual and don't have so much to do with something physical or tangible. I need, for me personally, to have something that I am touching and holding and making. But that thing that I am touching and holding and making is a response to a question that I have as a theoretical question, or that question comes out of that process of making.
So that leads me to a question I actually did send you, but I normally would only ask later, but I am so curious to know how you would answer it. What do you feel your work reveals about you as an artist, as a craftsperson, as a person?
So I spent a little, I was thinking about that and I kept going back to, I don't know. I don't know what it says. And then I thought, oh, what is it? What I think that I put into it, or is it what I hope that someone sees? Do I hope that they see something of me when they see this? So I don't know, in the reaction or in the interaction of someone with any of the work that I've done, whether it's music or whether it is these objects now, because I don't make music now. I feel like that I hope they have a question and an interaction. But I don't know that I know that they see anything of me, and I don't know that I care. For me, creatively, need it to have intention. I need myself to have intention. But as to how someone sees me through this thing or through what is made, then I'm lost. I don't know. Yeah.
Let me ask it then in a slightly different context.
Yeah.
Same question maybe, but when you give workshops,
Mm-hmm.
or let's say the whittling workshop, because if I
Yeah.
were anywhere near Switzerland, I would be signed up for your very next whittling workshop because I love that.
They're wonderful.
I can imagine. So when somebody comes to the workshop to learn how to whittle from you,
Mhm.
I imagine you're transmitting a lot to that person through the act of teaching them about working with woods, with hand tools.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so maybe that's a different way of looking at the same question. Why are they coming to you? What are they getting from you when they attend a workshop?
I hope what they're getting is a conversation, and a conversation with material, like material as an interactant, that we don't know necessarily what's going to come out of that workshop, and that we don't know certainly what's going to come out of this piece of wood. I can have intention. I can say, I would like a butter knife to come out of this. Please. And, but if we're starting with the actual branch and splitting the branch and then splitting it thinner and thinner, and then seeing, well, the fibers of this branch are moving in a really twisted way. Okay, do we care if it's twisted? This is the conversation. It's twisted. How do we respond? Is the curve okay? Do I accept that? Does it bug me? Am I a person that it really has to be straight? Because for some people, it's really important that it's straight. It matters. So then we start to figure out, okay, so what happens if there's curve? If there's curve and you don't want curve, is it still a fight with that piece of wood? Then maybe you need a different piece of wood. If it's not a fight, then what happens with that curve? Like, how do you integrate that into the thing that you had in your head? And you know, even the texture and the color of the wood, the way your knife functions and moves with or sticks, that's like really the first part that I noticed in the last workshop that I did. I like to spend a day just with one knife because it's the basic knife, but there's a lot that you can do with it. And when you have different movements and possibilities of holding the knife and using force or using delicate shifts in your body or in hand positioning, then you also have a sense too of how the wood is behaving. And then you have a lot more freedom in how you have something conceptually in your imagination or in your drawings and how that might start to behave with a piece of wood.
I appreciate that you used knife as an example because I have made two knives, but
That's wonderful.
one just from metal and one
Yeah.
the blade is metal and then the handle is wood.
Uh-huh.
And both times it didn't look anything like what the instructor had sort of slayed out as the knife that we
Yeah.
should be making. I was really pleased with them, though. I said they are very different than everybody else's, but partly because I just didn't have the skill. So I would be trying to do something like I thought we were supposed to be doing, and something else would happen. And so I sort of had to go with that
Yeah.
and accept that that was part of the process too. So I imagine for the people who come to you who are just learning how to whittle,
Yeah.
some of those happy accidents are because the wood itself is twisted.
Mhm.
And some of it comes from their idea in their head, but some of it just kind of happens.
Yeah,
You just don't
exactly.
fight it, though.
No, it really, yeah. And I mean, I'm pretty specific with people when they come to these ones as well, because I am not a traditional woodworker. I'm not a carpenter. I don't have the machinery there. We are working with hand tools and we're working with green wood. And that means there is a lot of variability and working with what you have. Something chips. How are you going to work with the chip or the crack? There is a point sometimes where you have to say, "There's nothing I can do. This will help create warmth with a nice fire." but 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 there's a lot of space for this is not symmetrical, and it's never going to be symmetrical. But there is beauty in its form, and its form has been a response to my hand. It fits in my hand. Having something that's simple and and practical but not obvious is beautiful to me and fascinating.
I would be in your workshops like every week. Teach me something new, teach me something else. I have a whole collection of butter knives at home.
Right. Endless possibilities, right? Yeah.
Uh, but it's not just wood that you work with. So the restoration of objects, for the most part, I feel like is wood and the
Yes.
whittling.
Yeah.
Okay. But then also workshops with fabrics and different kinds of things as well.
And this is what actually was really fascinating for me, was that I was thinking about wood and color. In Seattle, we were working with aniline dyes. Aniline is water-based, non-toxic, but the color part of an aniline dye, it's not natural. I think it's like petroleum based. I'm not certain about that. It's relatively light sensitive, and it's just entirely different than a natural dye because it doesn't interact with the chemical composition of the wood structure as well. So when I started at this workshop in Zurich, and I was working with this furniture, and the guy there would only work with furniture that was 100 years or older. That was his thing. He was like, it has to at least be 100 years. I said, okay, sure. And so if you're restoring things like this, then they've been dyed with natural processes. That means like you have walnut husks, the green bit that goes around the nut inside. So that's really a high tannin content, and it reacts with the tannins in the wood and creates this really rich brown. It's a beautiful, beautiful dye. So I was familiar with the ones that were more traditionally used with furniture. So like walnut husks and a bunch of other different types of woods with tannins or sort of yellows, reds, browns. But I was curious about what might happen with something like indigo, which is such a beautiful blue, but does it work with wood? I had an old book, the book is new, but it was full of old recipes collected in Germany and parts of Europe. And so it had some recipes for indigo, but they all used really, really serious toxic acids to activate the indigo. And I was like, well, maybe. I can't do this. I can't do this. I'll burn a hole through our living room floor or something. And and then and then I started looking into textiles because wood is cellulose. It's a cellulose fiber, and cotton is cellulose. And so the processes to dye a cotton fabric would be, in my opinion, pretty similar to how you would dye wood. You have variables, right? You can't dip your your kitchen table into a boiling vat of I don't know, like of matter to get a nice deep red. So you have to figure out how you can generate heat and what processes there are that you could make the color richer or what. But so I had a lot of conversations with people who dye fabric or textiles and the processes that they use with natural colors, so indigo and madder and cochineal and these things, and then started trying to translate how that functions with wood.
I think I limited you too much by saying artist, craftsperson, or artisan, and scientist, because it's just that you go deep into the processes, the material processes behind the work that you do, so that you can explore. I mean, I would never have thought of that, but that you can consider that cotton is in a similar family of material as wood, and so you can experiment with indigo with cotton in a way that you might not be able to drop your whole kitchen table into a vat of steaming indigo.
It was really fun when I made the connection because I was like, oh, right, cellulose. Oh my goodness. But absolutely, like, my husband's a scientist. I'm not, I would never really consider myself a scientist, but I do love it when I make that connection. I'm like, hey, you know what? Did you know, that it was cellulose? And he's like, oh, no, I had no idea.
I think that's really cool. That's really, really cool. Let me take us a different tack, and I'm going to ask you where you see vulnerability in the work that you do.
Mm-hmm. This was the same. It was really, I was doing cartwheels and somersaults and sort of twisting myself around trying to think about it. I think there's vulnerability in the questions posed, I think, to myself about how I'm thinking. Or you know what? There's vulnerability in the interaction when I'm working with or collaborating with, I think, definitely. Because I think it exists between people, mostly, a state of vulnerability, or it can exist between. In isolation, I don't know that it does, except for psychologically, right? I can feel vulnerable because I'm trying to do something that I don't think that I might know how to do, or that feels risky because I think something's going to break. But that then ends with me as well. Whereas vulnerability with means that it's between, I think, at least one person. One of my favorite projects so far has been for this woman who's an artist, and she makes these beautiful books as well as other things. But I love books, and these are wonderful, and they have different print processes and textures. And she was going to a book festival in Berlin, and then also had a book festival here in Zurich. She had a table where her books were on the table, and she didn't want them to lie flat. So we collaborated and thought about how there might be something to hold these books. And that process was fantastic. And also then that would be a moment of vulnerability, because the question posed is, well, I have these books, how do we hold them? But it's open. It's a blank then. And then it's my process of, well, I think that this would be an interesting way, but does it work? And that process of when something doesn't work. Oh, this works in this context, but actually it's really hard to carry a long, thin stick, to Berlin on a train. Okay, so what about a short stick? And I think that there's also trust, to have someone's trust that they say that they need and want, and to hope that I can fulfill a need and a want, and that visually that it'll be interesting, that it'll be a response that matters in relationship to the book as well. That it doesn't exist without the book. The book exists with the piece as well.
I didn't want to push it too far, but you said that you loved books. And so for somebody for whom books are very precious, particularly these books, it sounds like it matters that it's books, that it's those books. And it wouldn't be bricks. It wouldn't be just sheafs of 8.5 by 11 or whatever legal size paper. It's those books. And that really matters in the collaboration with the book maker.
Yeah.
That it's the right support for those books.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and even the shape of the thing holding the thing, for me, that was the physical shape was a interaction with what's in the book and the shape of the book. You can't, I don't think, or ought to be always vulnerable, but it allows for a protective kind of space where there's an openness and there's a honesty.
You can learn more about Molly and her work on her website, atelierindigoandoak.com, and on Instagram at @atelierindigoandoak.